Hi you guys, and welcome back to my channel. My name is McKenna. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe below. Today I'm actually going to be talking to you about how I got my NASM certification, kind of tips and tricks and what I did to study for that exam. I have a little list on my phone that I'm going to use just to keep me more organized. I don't want to leave anything out, and I figured I would just go through and tell you everything that I studied and how I passed. So I will leave timestamps below on when I start talking about what I think you should study. Check below for the timestamps so that you can kind of fast forward to the parts that you are interested in. So the first thing that I wanted to start with is why I chose to get my personal training certification. I actually chose to do this because I wanted to become a group fitness coach for F45 originally. This is when I was living in San Diego. I got a job with F45, but they said I needed my personal training certification. So I got online and I did some research to find out what was the best certification program, which actually leads me to my next question, why NASM? I chose this because I found through research that it was basically the most well-respected certification. According to what I read online, it is harder than the other certifications that are out there, and so I wanted to pick something that was going to be easily accepted across the board. You need to keep in mind, sure, like you can hop on and in a weekend get your personal training certification, and some gyms will accept that, but keep in mind that a gym like F45 or Orange Theory or even some of the bigger gyms and franchises will only take certain certifications. So make sure you do your research on where you end up wanting to work and what certification they will accept. So I purchased the self-study package. It's the cheapest one. I ended up paying around, I think, $450 or $500. And I will say NASM is always running a discount, so never pay full price. If you see it on their website, I would contact them, say something about seeing a special somewhere or hearing about a special, and they usually have quite a bit of discounts going on, so make sure you never pay full price for that. For me, it took about 3 months. You have 6 months to take the test or the final exam at the end. So my husband got a job out of state, so I knew we were going to end up moving, so then it kind of put a halt on everything, and it took me a couple months to actually get started on the certification process. But from when I started studying, which was actually during lockdown, it took me about 3 months, and in all honesty, I really didn't take studying seriously until the last month. So I feel like I could have done this in about a month if I had really just gotten right to the point. I probably could have done this in a month because a majority of my studying was done in that month. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about there's 120 tests on the exam. 20 of those questions don't actually count for or against you. So really the exam is like 100 questions, and they are, I will say, it was a pretty hard exam, but if you study properly, I hear people online saying it's like the hardest thing ever, and a bunch of my friends were saying that they took it and they didn't pass, they failed it, and they switched over to like ACE or another program. It kind of scared me, but I want to say that if you truly study, and I don't mean anything against my friends, but if you truly study, you will have no problem with this. I got in my head a ton before taking the exam, and when I took it, I was like, it was easier than I was expecting it to be just from everything that I was hearing. I don't want to say it's easy, because it's not easy. I definitely put in the time, and if you put in the time, you can definitely do it. Okay, so I thought I would go over really quick how I studied. So I used GoodNotes on my iPad. If you have that app, you know what I'm talking about. GoodNotes, I pulled in the PDF of the textbook, and that is where I read the textbook. That is where I had like the study exams. I got online, I found a couple study exams that I used and listened to some YouTube videos like you're doing here. But I felt like none of the YouTube videos, like a ton of them were talking about how hard it was and how horrible it was, and honestly a ton of them were kind of scaring me more than helping me. So I wanted to make this video to kind of just go over the things that I feel like you need to know, study those things. And I will say, I actually didn't read the whole textbook. I just read the important chapters, which were chapter 7 and 14 were like the key chapters. I read 3, and then there was a chapter towards the end of the book that I read, which I don't think was as important as 7 and 14. And how I did it was I took the module quizzes at the end. So I took the quizzes at the end of the module, and I pulled out all the concepts that were in those quizzes, and I studied those individually. And I used flashcards on Quizlet. I used YouTube videos. You can search concepts in the back of the textbook, and then I would just go read about that specific concept that I needed to understand. Kind of did it that way. Then I would retake that quiz at the end of the module and see how I did. They also have quizzes for each chapter, I believe, as well. I mainly focused on the module quizzes. That is kind of how I studied. I pulled concepts out of there and really studied those. As soon as you understand the concepts of things, really the questions become really easy. Once I was done studying and when I was about ready to take the test, the final exam or whatever, I retook those module quizzes and all the quizzes that I could that they give you with the NASM study. I took all of those quizzes again, and I took them until I got 100% on them 2 times in a row, which sometimes was very frustrating. But any questions that I got wrong, I reread them, figured out why I got them wrong, and then would study that concept. There's also a NASM podcast that they have going. I don't know how frequently they post to it, but I did listen to some episodes on there, which might help you. If you have questions about a concept, you can go to that podcast, scroll down until you see a podcast episode on that specific topic and listen to that. Of course, like I said earlier, I made tons of flashcards on Quizlet, just went through them over and over and over again. I studied in my free time. When I was sitting at an appointment waiting, I would study. When I was sitting in the car and somebody else was driving, I'd be studying. So if you hop on YouTube, as you guys are right now, you'll find too that there are a ton of videos on various concepts like the blood flow in the heart. You can find a video on that. The muscles in the body, there's also like a website, Poke Muscle. Like there's just so much stuff on the web. If you search a concept that you're having trouble with, you can generally find a little video or a web page that talks about it. And that is kind of what I did to learn the concepts rather than reading the book. I'm a very visual person, so seeing a video that showed me how things were working really helped me out. People talk about, I think it's called mnemonic devices or something like that. Is that what it's called? I'm not sure. But where you have a phrase and the first letter of each word, you come up with a saying that helps you remember that. And I did do that on a couple things. To share mine, I don't feel like it helps because they were things that resonated with me, and I feel like if you create your own, you're more than likely to remember them. So I encourage you, if you're struggling with something on how to remember it, make a little phrase that helps you remember exactly what you're trying to study. I also will say that I believe that there is a Facebook group for the NASM exam, all the people who are trying to take it. I didn't add myself to that group, but looking back, that's probably something that I would have done if I were doing it again. I did take all of like a whole year of anatomy and physiology, so I had a ton of background. A ton of this was common sense to me, or things I already knew, like the muscles, the way the body works, the lungs and the heart and how the blood flows, and all of that were things that I had a basic understanding on. So I was able to kind of skim over all that stuff pretty briefly. I feel like that's probably the hardest part for a lot of people, so spend some time really studying the muscles. And I wouldn't focus on every little tiny detailed muscle. I would really focus on the main muscles, like what ones are going to be overactive and what ones are going to be underactive, which I'll get into that a little bit more as we go on. In terms of studying, I would actually do the movements myself and feel it in my body, feel what muscles were working. That really helps me. Like the overhead squat assessment, actually do it on yourself, feel what muscles are working. It kind of starts to make more sense when you're actually feeling it on yourself. You'll feel what muscles are working, you'll feel what muscles are tight, you'll feel all of that stuff. And then also practice it on your friends. You'll be able to see what muscles are overactive on your friends, underactive, etc. I touched on it earlier, but there's also a website called Poke Muscle that pretty much everyone talks about. It is really helpful if you need to memorize the muscles. I used it in A&P, but you could definitely use it studying for the NASM exam. Would be extremely helpful and a great way to memorize the muscles really fast. I think on Poke Muscle too, they pretty much have every muscle that you need to know. Outside of that, I don't think NASM really goes over any of the smaller muscles. I will say one more thing, that the questions on your exam are different than the practice questions, but they're all the same concept. They just word them differently or kind of reverse it in a way. Like instead of asking what muscles are overactive in this scenario, they'll ask what muscles are underactive in this scenario. So as long as you know the concepts, you'll be completely fine. Just make sure you understand the entire concept, both forward and backwards, not just how you memorize it from taking the practice exams. So like I already said, I didn't read the entire textbook. I probably should have, but I didn't, and I passed just fine on my first try. Another great YouTube channel you can watch is Show Up Fitness. I believe that's what they're called. This guy is kind of quirky, but he goes right to the point on what you need to know. He knows his stuff. He's taken the exam, I think, several times. He tells you exactly what you need to know and what stuff they could care less about. So you could also check out his YouTube channel as well. So I'm going to go briefly over all of the concepts that I feel like you should understand. Maybe get out a pen and paper, write these all down, and then do your own research on each one of these concepts. Obviously, I'm not here to teach it to you. I'm just going to give you pointers on what I think you should learn about, and if you understand most of these concepts, I think you'll be completely fine on the exam. So the first one is the OPT model. So you're going to focus on stabilization, strength, power, exercises, and then like reps, ranges, the times, the rest times, and everything like that. This is definitely a good thing to study with flashcards. Know them like the back of your hand. Know the types of stretching like in the flexibility chapter. Active, isolation, stretching, dynamic stretching, static stretching, self-myofascial release, like foam rolling. Know what foam rolling does, how long to hold on a like tender area. Like I said above, I would know all the main muscles of the body. You're gonna need them. Also know if they're generally overactive or generally underactive. Also keep in mind whatever is overactive needs to be lengthened and whatever is underactive needs to be strengthened. So keep that in mind. Know the overhead squat assessment. So if you were to see somebody doing the overhead squat assessment, you would, for one, know what it is. Two, know how to evaluate and what muscles would be overactive, underactive, if they're doing it properly, etc. Know excessive lean forward, what that means. If your knees knock in, what that means. Know the push-pull assessment, know the various tests such as like the Davies test, the Sharks test, the Rockport test, what they do, why you need to know them, and all of that. So I would definitely know those. They ask you probably one question on each really briefly. When you see it on there, you're gonna wanna know it. Carbs, fat, proteins, and like how much of each category percentage-wise somebody should eat depending on what their fitness goals are and stuff like that. Obviously, we're not nutritionists in this course, but they want you to know a brief understanding. High protein diets also you should know are hard on your kidneys, so keep that in mind. Heart rate, you're gonna wanna know how to calculate it. Max reserve, max heart rate, resting heart rate. Just read over that, skim over that, whatever you gotta do. Don't know if I had mentioned this earlier, but you wanna know the upper cross syndrome and the lower cross syndrome. Hunched shoulders for the upper cross, like an excessive or like a super big arch is the lower cross syndrome. Client interactions and goals, which I think is the chapter I was referring to towards the end. I would briefly read that one. Also, they're gonna ask you when you should alert a medical professional. So obviously you wanna alert a medical professional if there's something life-threatening. Know the difference between subjective, like lifestyle, medical history, and objective, such as body assessment and different tests that I referred to earlier. Know the blood flow through the heart and like how it goes through the lungs. Know that blood flow. Also know that it's reversed when it goes through the lungs, so keep that in mind. I also recommend looking that up on a YouTube video. You can find tons of videos. I think it's like Khan Academy, maybe? Khan Academy has a great video on the blood flow of the heart. I will try and link that below as well. Check that out. It's a great video. I use that in A&P. Bench press strength assessment. And I already talked about knowing the heart rate zone, so I have that on here twice. Make sure you know all of that stuff. I would make a brief list of all of that, and as you learn the concepts, check it off. That's exactly what I did. I had this huge list of concepts that I needed to understand that I didn't know. As soon as I had a pretty good grasp on it, I crossed it off, moved on to the next concept. Yeah, I read what I needed to. I watched YouTube videos on what I needed to do. The self-study package comes with a study guide. You can use that. I printed it off. I wrote all the questions out. I memorized them, made flashcards, did all of the typical studying stuff. So hopefully this is all helping you. If it does, let me know below. If you're taking your exam here shortly, make sure you keep me posted on how it goes and if this video helped you out at all. Best of luck if you're going to take your NASM exam. I highly recommend doing NASM over anything else, but like I said, do not pay full price. And maybe you already did, and maybe you're kind of kicking yourself for it, but pass it along so that the next person doesn't pay full price. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up if it helped you at all, and make sure you subscribe. And I will see you next time.